So I dug into the carburetor from Kiwi's 427 Cobra last night, and what I found with this thing is like, some of it is truly mind-boggling. And we're going to get into all of that in a second. But first I just want to comment on a couple of things from previous videos. So last night Ron was in here after I got done with the carburetor. He came in, he's like the late night bodywork fairy, so he's been cleaning up and detailing the wheel openings on the Dart. He did the other side now. So this is all coming along nice. And like I said, this is the first car to go out this year. So this is what we're going to focus on now for the next few weeks. The video we did day before yesterday, Cody and Kristen's Chrysler and the transmission explosion. There had to be at least 100 comments about how we got under the car using just the jack stand, and we didn't have, or just floor jack, and we didn't have jack stands under the car. I'm like, my God. All right, first off, we never jacked the car all the way up. In fact, the front wheel never left the ground. All I did was take up the slack on the suspension so we could slide underneath. The tires and wheels never came off the car. If for some reason the jack had collapsed, it had blown out, it had just disintegrated, the worst that would have happened was the car would have just come to its normal ride height, which either of us would fit under the car at its normal ride height. I mean, it's not like, this wasn't an act of death-defying, like, you know, we didn't have the car jacked way up and the wheels off of it and just willy-nilly bouncing around underneath. No, we just lifted the car enough to slide underneath, do what we had to do, and then pull it out. So no, there was less than zero danger of either of us getting hurt. Even in the absolute worst case scenario, if an asteroid came out of the sky and hit the jack while we were under it, the worst we would have had to do was go, and then slide out. Come on, guys, seriously. All right, now, at the end of yesterday's video over at Kiwi's, I got in my Jeep and started it up, and a lot of you guys were commenting, I wouldn't even drive that thing out of the parking lot. You're crazy, because it's rattling like crazy. Well, we've driven that thing 52,000 miles. That truck gets driven every single day, usually 100 miles a day, between all of the round trips to this place and the running around. You guys have no idea how much running around this channel, requires. It's used constantly. But that's the noise. That's why we're doing this 4.0. It's for that red Jeep. So, and this is one that we got a little sidetracked on because we had the other videos come up. And we'll be back on this, for you guys who are following the Your First Engine Job series, we'll be back on this probably Monday. I'm not here this weekend. We're going someplace. So that's it with that. But yeah, that's the noise that the Jeep makes. That's what a broken skirt sounds like. Where's the one with the broken skirt? Here. Yeah, that's the noise that this makes. So, but yeah, like I said, 52,000 miles. Been driving that thing for 52,000 miles, rattling like that. All right, so let's talk about Kiwi's carburetor here. And there's a lot to cover. So, we started the Cobra, and it was just fat. He was just dumping gas at idle, but nothing coming through the boosters. So we knew that the needle and seat wasn't sticking. We knew that the float wasn't adjusted too high. The fuel was coming from someplace else. And there was no way to diagnose it any further on the car. We had to take it off and take it apart. So the very first thing I did was I checked the numbers on the carburetor because I was like, this is an unusual carburetor. It's got a couple of features you wouldn't expect on a typical out-of-the-box 600 Holley, which is what this is. So I checked the numbers, and they come up as being for the factory primary carb for the 427 dual quad setup. And I was like, wow, this is a new old stock carburetor. Oh my God, I better treat this thing, with surgical precision because this is a priceless, irreplaceable carburetor. And I was like, yeah, let me research a little bit. So I checked the numbers, and as it turns out, this is a reproduction. It's a repro of the factory primary carburetor. It's not the real thing. And that kind of should have been my first tip off that I may find some unusual stuff inside this carburetor. So as I'm examining it, the first thing I noticed, and like I said, it's all still apart. The first thing I noticed was that the throttle bores look a little small. This is supposed to be a 600 CFM carburetor. And here we have a regular out-of-the-box 600 CFM Holley. And you can see there's a fairly significant difference in the bore size. It's about 70 thousandths of an inch difference in bore size. So this is what would be considered a true 600 Holley. And this one here would actually only measure out to be, I'm gonna guesstimate 525, 550 CFM. So this is supposed to be a 600, but it has significantly smaller throttle bores than the actual 600. All right. So I'm looking for, again, we noted the needle in the seat wasn't leaking. We knew that the float was adjusted to a correct height. So we noted our fueling problem is not in this section of the carburetor. So we go, let's put this here. Let's put this here. So I pop the bowl off, and the first thing that I notice, looking at this, is at first it has tiny primary jets. And I didn't check the numbers on them yet, but they're tiny. I'm like, that's weird. And then I noticed right away that this thing has a power valve block-off in it. Like, why does this have a power valve block-off, and why does it have such small jets? So when you do block off a power valve, you have to up the size of the main jets, whereas a power valve supplements that circuit. So we've got tiny mains, and we've got a power valve block-off. So that's my first clue that there's something not right here. And there we go. We've got our power valve blank. So the first thing I suspected was that perhaps the power valve was loose. So I put the wrench to it, and it wasn't loose. It was tight, but not locked down tight. And when I unscrewed it, I found that it has two gaskets. Whoever blanked this meter and block off, or the power valve, here's one gasket, and here's the second gasket. So they put this thing together with two gaskets. And while this was still fresh, when I first took it apart, I could see that there was a section between these two gaskets that was wet. So it's all, obviously, it's all dry now because this is hours later. But there was a section that was wet. So I'm like, okay, there's a clue. That might be the total thing. So, but you know, you got to keep looking. You got to always scrutinize this stuff. So, I almost just says, all right, I go online and I go to find what the actual specs for this carburetor are supposed to be. The reproduction, not the original. So I did. After a little bit of hunting, I found a Ford forum, and they were discussing these carburetors specifically. So as it turns out, they're supposed to have 60s in the mains and a 6.5 power valve, not a blank. So somebody blanked this off trying to fix a problem, and probably just inadvertently created another one by doubling up the gaskets. What problem were they after that they changed this? Was it a blown power valve that they just decided that they were going to put a blank in? Probably not, because you would just replace a blown power valve with a good power valve. You wouldn't blank it off, which means that somebody was pulling their hair out trying to figure out what was going on with this thing. So the next thing I look at is this gasket. So you can see the normal staining of fuel on this gasket. But look at this area right here. Okay, so you see this part of it is just clean, it's untouched, and this part is stained, which means that some fuel was able to get in between there and here. All right, now a warped main body is something that'll give you that. So the first thing I did was I took this off, and I went to get my straight edge to start laying it across and see if I could find any light anywhere in there. But right away my eye caught this. I don't know if you could see this or not, but see that line? Okay, there's an imperfection in this casting. Now you'll find these things warped. You'll find them where they got low spots, high spots, all different situations. But this is a new one on me. So you see it's got this line that's across. This was a bad casting. And I mean, you could feel this. This isn't like, you know, oh, it's just a little faint line. No, you can actually feel this. And this line intersects, so this is the feed, this is the passage that goes to the accelerator pumps. So it actually intersects, this line intersects this area right here. So this engine not only was pulling fuel from the double gaskets on the power valve, but it was also pulling fuel under vacuum from the accelerator pump circuit. And that's why this thing was so wet. When I first took this apart, this area right here, which is supposed to be dry, it's like a vacuum chamber, was just drenched with gas. So here we have a situation where not only are we pulling fuel from a blanked off power valve, but the blanked off power valve was actually done to compensate for this, which whoever was screwing around with this carburetor before me, I guess just didn't notice. And so we had vacuum pulling from the accelerator pump circuit and vacuum pulling from around the power valve block off plate. Crazy, right? This is what you get with reproduction stuff. Now, I don't know if Holley makes these, if Holley themselves make these, or if they're manufactured overseas. I don't know. And I really can't find that information. Holley doesn't directly, at least as far as I can find, Holley doesn't offer this reproduction carburetor, which means that these are probably manufactured by some overseas vendor and sold to guys looking for it. Now, there are other differences between this and the factory carburetor, or the, what should be the factory carburetor, or what an NOS carburetor would be. But it's mostly for people looking for that list number. So that, you've got a 427 dual quad set up and you want the right numbers. Well, that's what this carburetor provides. It provides the right numbers, but it really doesn't provide the right anything else. So here's the solution with this, how we're going to fix this. When you get a warped main body on these carburetors, and that's fairly common, even just on a regular, a known Holley carburetor, it's not unusual to have a warped main body. And the way to fix these things is just to take a file, get comfortable, put this thing in your lap, and just file away until you get all of the high spots and low spots gone. So that's what we're going to do with this one. We're going to file this away until we've evened out the step between the top and the bottom here. Obviously, we'll put it together with a new gasket. We'll put the correct power valve, I have it here someplace, we'll put the correct power valve back in it with one gasket. And I'm going to leave the jets alone. Now, the jetting on this, like I said, I don't know what the factory Ford jetting was for this, but it seems very small. I'm not a psychic, so I can't predict what this engine is going to actually want, but I'm going to say right now that the jets that are in here are probably, they're way small. I would expect 70s, 72s, like something in that range, to make this thing happy. But like I says, we're not doing a tune-up at this stage of the game. We're just trying to get this thing to function, start, run, drive, and not wash itself out. So that's what I'm going to do on this now, and then we're going to run this back over to Kiwi, stick it on the car, and see how it runs. I'll see you in the future.